Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host Rashid, and we're waiting for our guests of honor to arrive. I'm sorry for all those we're having feedback, and you know how it happens whenever we go live. This is what happens. We're getting all kind of messages now. Now, what's crazy about this is a few seconds ago I didn't get any messages. I didn't get any feedback, and I am in the booth waiting for I'm in the booth waiting for Scott to appear. And now I before let me text him, let him know that we're ready, and we'll go from there. Give me 1 second, everyone. Um let's see. Okay. Send him a message. Mm-mm. Uh-uh. Hold on, everyone. Oh man, my God. Oh, there he is. He's in the booth right now. I'm gonna bring this guy in, Scott. I'm telling you, there's no need for introduction. If you don't know who this guy is, then you've been buried up under a rock for the last 2 or 3 years. I gotta bring in my guy, Scott Ritter. How's it going today, Scott?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Before we go into anything, tell the people about your new book.
Well, the book is called Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. It's a combination history and memoir about what I consider to be one of the most important um, events in the in recent times. The implementation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, treaty that not only got rid of entire categories of nuclear weapons that are threatening um, the world with imminent nuclear destruction, but also redefined arms control by creating what are known as on-site inspection teams, teams of trained personnel who go to the territory of the other party and physically inspect the site. Prior to this treaty, neither side trusted each other enough to allow human beings to enter their territory. They just assumed that they were going to spy and be up to no good. But when the decision was made to get rid of these weapons, I think everybody recognized that there had to be a compliance verification standard that was greater than that could be gotten from, say, satellite photographs. You had to have the human element on the ground. And so we started that, and that became the trendsetter. Every major arms control agreement since that time has on-site inspectors. And that happened from this treaty. So this is a treaty that I sort of joke sometimes, but it's not really a joke. I tell people when they meet me, shake my hand and buy me a beer, because if it weren't for me, you'd be dead today. And everybody's like, haha. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty much serious. If it weren't for me and the other inspectors who did this treaty, you'd be dead today. We wouldn't be here. There would have been a nuclear war. And I'm 100% certain that that would have been the case, because these weapons were too dangerous, too destabilizing, and too susceptible to mistakes. I'll give you an example of history. The Pershing II missile, which was the American missile, there was two major American systems that were introduced to cause this treaty to be needed. Pershing II, which is a solid rocket ballistic missile, and then the ground launched cruise missile, which is like the Tomahawk missile we see today, fired from ships and airplanes, but this time fired from the ground. The Pershing II, once launched from its West German base, could hit the Kremlin in about 10 minutes. That means that if there was a mistake, or somebody detected a launch that wasn't a launch but it was detected, and the Soviets have to treat this, they have 10 minutes to decide, is that a mistake or do we die? 10 minutes. So that's not a lot of time. And I'll give you the example. In 1995, after the weapons were destroyed, the Norwegians fired an atmospheric test rocket into the air. Innocent enough, but the Russian radars picked it up and interpreted it as a U.S. Navy Trident missile coming at Russia and they interpreted that to be a preemptive strike, do what they call EMP, electromagnetic impulse, that would basically a pulse that would blind all the Russian radars and communications for a follow-on first strike. The nuclear football in America, we always talk about the guy that follows the president with the codes, the nuclear codes, launch codes. It's the football, and if the president needs it, he opens it up and all that stuff. Well, the Russians had one too. They actually brought the football to Boris Yeltsin, the president, and said, "You have to launch missiles now. You have to launch right now. They've launched a preemptive strike. You have to launch now." Now, if the INF treaty hadn't existed and the Pershing missile was there 10 minutes away, Boris Yeltsin would have launched those missiles. We'd all be dead. 100% guarantee. But because those missiles weren't there, he had a little bit of time, a little bit more time, about 15 minutes, where he was able to wait. And somebody said, "Oops, our mistake. It's a Norwegian test rocket. False alarm, close the football, go back to living life." We were that close to nuclear annihilation. And the only reason why it didn't happen is because of the treaty that we put in. So I think this is an important book from that perspective. But, and it's also a book that I tell from my perspective, because I was lucky enough to be a participant. I was on the ground when this organization was created. I was the first inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union. And I spent 2.5 years implementing this critical treaty at a critical time when people were trying to kill this treaty. There were people who weren't happy about arms control, just like we have today. People are like, "No, we need to have more nuclear weapons. We can't trust the Soviets. We need more." And those silly inspectors are over there and they're ruining all this. So we want to destroy the treaty and get rid of it. We had to overcome all that. Plus, we had to build something in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally the middle of nowhere. This Soviet missile factory that I was stationed outside of was 750 kilometers away from Moscow in the foothills of the Ural Mountains. And when we started our work in the summer of 1988, the threat we were facing were mosquitoes, flies, ticks that had tick-borne encephalitis that would kill you if they bit you, and swamps. And we had to build all this stuff. Now, we didn't get it done in time, so the winter comes. Winter there is -50, -70 degrees. We have to go out there and continue to build the stuff, construct the stuff, the most sophisticated monitoring technologies in the world, including a $12 million giant X-ray machine that was supposed to X-ray the missiles as they come out of the factory. We had to put this in the wintertime while people were trying to undermine our work. And we didn't do it by ourselves. And here comes one of the more interesting aspects of the book. We did it in cooperation with the Soviets, full cooperation. I explained in the book how I had spent my initial moments in the Marine Corps training to kill Russians. That's why I joined the Marine Corps. That's all I wanted to do, is kill Russians, defend my country against the communist threat. And people today sort of chuckle about it. "Oh, that's cute." No, it wasn't cute. It was real. Communists were there. The Soviet army was in Europe. I grew up in Europe. I graduated from a high school, American high school in Germany, that was just a few dozens of miles away from the front lines. And if the war happened, my house, my family, everybody would have been caught up in that war. This was real. I grew up with that, and I was ready to take those what's on to defend freedom. So it wasn't a joke. And I spent 2.5 years in the Marine Corps, which is a serious organization, helping reshape the way we were approached war against the Soviet target. So I was trained to kill the commies, trained to kill the Soviets. And then they send me there. So it's sort of a surreal thing. 1 minute I'm going to kill every one of these guys I meet. Next minute, I got to work with them. And that's a big leap. And it took a while to adjust to that. But there was a moment, and I talk about it in the book. It was New Year's Eve, 1988. And I was invited into the home. Me and some other inspectors were invited into the homes of our Soviet counterparts. We got to meet their families, and we got to see them interact as human beings. And it was just one of these genius moments where the light comes on, you go, "I don't want to kill these people anymore. Why would I ever want to kill these people? Why? What a dumb thing to be doing. We need to be working with these people to make a better world for their families, for my families, for everybody." And that was the road to Damascus moment, where the shining light came on, and I saw the thing. It was a transformative moment. And I describe it in the book, and I describe how we worked with these guys, and I hopefully I'm able to impart on people the humanity of the Soviets, of the Russians. And then I talk about it in the time of perestroika, because as I was there doing this with my other inspectors, the Soviet Union is going through this transformation, this revolutionary transformation away from old communist party, single party control to democracy. I had the privilege of actually being able to observe the very first democratic elections in the history of the Soviet Union, go to the polling places and watch people participate in this. And it was fantastic. And we lived in the town amongst these people. So we saw how perestroika affected them, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so it's about disarmament in the time of perestroika. And, it's a fascinating history I think people need to know, because today we don't have arms control. Today we have one treaty left. That treaty's been suspended because nobody trusts anybody anymore. We've gone backwards in the trust factor. Ronald Reagan, when he spoke about arms control, said trust but verify. Meaning, yeah, okay, we trust you, but we have to verify. So we're going to send the inspectors over. Well, no inspectors are going over right now because the United States messed that up. And now the United States wants to send its inspectors to Russia to inspect facilities that the Russians say are critical to their national security at a time when the United States says our policy is the strategic defeat of Russia. And the Russians are saying, well, if your policy is to defeat us strategically, and then you want to get inspectors to come in and look at our strategic weapons, those two things don't mesh. So as long as you have that policy, we're not letting your inspectors in anymore. Frozen. Now they're not throwing the treaty away. So the treaty expires in February of 2026. Until then, the Russians say they'll comply, but there won't be verification. So we don't know that they're complying because no inspectors are going over there. We say we'll comply, but there's no verification. They don't know that we're complying because there's no inspectors. But be that as it may, February 26 or 2026, this treaty goes away, and then there's nothing. And now we have two sides that don't like each other, no arms control constraint. There will be an arms race, and we're right back to where we talked about at the beginning. Weapons ready to be fired, one mistake, and we all die. That kind of thing. So people say, well, what do we do? I mean, they'd say relations have never been worse between Russia and the United States today. And I say, well, there was a time when they were worse. That was in the 1980s before the INF Treaty, back when I was learning how to kill Russians from being this high. We're not there yet. We're not in the point where kids are raised to kill a commie for mommy, better dead than red. We're not there yet. That's the life I had. And my point is, we overcame that. And how do we do that? The INF Treaty. So this isn't just a history book. This is a template of hope. Read this book and you'll say, hey, wait a minute, that worked. That worked. This is amazing. This worked. This is a plan of action that we could implement today, and you're darn right. It's a template of hope. People read this book, and I hope you come out of it saying, we need more of that. And then what I hope you do is you start calling your representatives or people running for office, and you attend the meetings, and you raise your hand, and you say, is arms control your number one policy? I don't want to hear about anything else. Is arms control your number one policy? Well, why should it be? Because if it isn't, we're all going to be dead in 5 years, and everything else you want to accomplish just doesn't matter. And that's the truth, ladies and gentlemen. If we don't get arms control back on the table, we'll all be dead in a couple of years, and everything else you think you want to accomplish in life won't matter. It's the number one problem faced by us today. And, how do we get there? Read my book. It's a template of it shows you, it gives you a path based upon history. People say those who fail to learn the lessons of history are condemned to repeat it. Sometimes, however, the lesson of history should be learned. It's not that you're condemned to repeat it. We want to repeat what happened back then. It's a history lesson we want to do again. So read the book, learn the history, and try and make it happen again.
Two things. Where can they get your book from? And second, why are people in Washington and at the Pentagon so bent on vilifying and demonizing Russia? And why is it so important for them to be the hegemonic power on the planet?
Okay, well, the first part's the easy part of that question. You can get the book from the publisher, claritypress.com. If you go on their website, it's one of the featured books there. Or Amazon has it, Barnes & Nobles has it. You can go online. All you have to do is type in "disarm at the time of perestroika," and they'll give you plenty of options. And if you want the rapid delivery of Amazon, do that. If you want to help my publisher out, buy directly from the publisher. For me, it doesn't matter because I'm an author, and authors never make enough money off book selling. But hey, buy the book, and I would say that it's the kind of book that you want to buy, you want to read, and you want to pass it around to all your friends and families and say, read this book, read this book. I would prefer that if you could guarantee me that I sold one copy and 1 million people read it, that's better than selling 1 million copies and people just putting it to the side. This is a book that was written to be read. It's not written to make money, it's written to be read. It's there. Please get it, read it. Now we come to the hard part of your question. When Ronald Reagan was elected president, he called the Soviet Union the evil empire. And we were still touched by the legacy of the McCarthy era. If you remember I say if you remember, you and I weren't around in the 1950s, but we know the history. In the McCarthy era, Joe McCarthy, Machine Gun Joe, Tail Gunner Joe, it's a nickname from his wartime non-experiences, was a senator from Wisconsin. Yeah, he hyped up his war record just like other people did. He was a senator from Wisconsin who made a reputation by accusing everybody of being a communist. And it actually shut down Hollywood. There's been a lot of movies made, etc. There's a famous movie, The Way We Were, Barbara Streisand, Robert Redford, touches on the McCarthy era and that stuff. And yes, we overcame McCarthyism because people of honor finally stood up. But that was overcoming McCarthyism. Got rid of Joe McCarthy using the fear of communism to attack Americans, but it didn't get rid of the fear of communists. Sputnik. The Russians put Sputnik into space, and every American was up there looking at the sky as this thing went around. And we went, "Oh my God, the Russians beat us to space." And it started this whole competition between the United States and the Soviet Union that led to the arms race, nuclear weapons, arms race, etc. So when Ronald Reagan called it the evil empire, there was a lot of history there, attached to it. And Americans had bought into that. But because of Ronald Reagan, one of the interesting things is, like I said, when I joined the Marine Corps, it was the evil empire in my mind, purely. It was 100% the evil empire. I wanted to kill them all, wade into them like you've never waded into anything in your life. And Ronald Reagan was my man. I know there's a lot of people out there going, "I don't like you anymore, Ritter." That's okay. I was in the military. He was a hardcore pro-defense kind of guy. I didn't pay too much attention to public policy, domestic policy. That was the business of the American people. I was joining the military to stand on the wall and protect you all from the evils out there. So I thought Ronald Reagan was a good guy. And so it was sort of difficult for me when he entered this treaty, because to me, it was a betrayal of everything that I thought that I joined the military for. I didn't join the military to make peace with the Soviet Union. I joined the military to kill them, and I wanted to go to war. And you're now making peace with these guys. That was problematic. And when I showed up in the Soviet Union in June of 1988, Reagan had already been there. But an amazing thing happened. He went to a Soviet university in Moscow, and he was asked by the students, they said, "Do you still consider us to be the evil empire?" And he said, "No, I consider you guys to be friends." Boom. My commander-in-chief just said these guys are the friends now. But my point is that we had turned the corner on Russophobia back then. And suddenly it became cool to think of the Soviets, the Russians, not as the enemy, but people that we could peacefully coexist with, that we could cooperate with. But the reason why we're able to think about that is because deep inside we still feared them. They were still that thing that we called the evil empire. Arms control was important because it protected us from the evil empire. And so we respected them. When we sat down with them, it was, yeah, we shake your hands. But, it would be, for instance, if you and I, were boxers and we beat the garbage out of each other for several fights. And we still want to beat the garbage out of each other, but we decided that we're getting too old to beat the garbage out of each other. So we sit down at the table to talk, and we reach over, we shake hands. There's going to be respect there because we both know that hand not leaving dog poop out of my face at one point in time. But we're also like, those days are done. We respect each other. We're going to talk as equals. That's what was going on at that time. The Soviet Union, United States was equals. And then the Soviet Union collapsed. And the United States was not, we had a new president, George Herbert Walker Bush, that hadn't had the transformation that Ronald Reagan had. He didn't view them as friends, the Soviets, he viewed them as former enemies. Not just that, but now they're defeated enemies. So rather than sitting down at the table as equals, it's now we sit down and we look at them, we're going, well, you ain't what you used to be. I don't have to fear you anymore. So, I got more important things to do. How much time do you need for this meeting? Kind of stuff. And that's how we started treating them lesser. And during the 1990s, when Bill Clinton became president, we abused the Russians. I mean, what we did to them was just criminal. We went in there and we facilitated the economic conquest where we were stealing wealth from them, bringing it out, robbing them blind. And we dominated them politically. In 2016, everybody says the Russians colluded with Trump to steal an election. No, they didn't. We now know that that was a lie. But at the time, they were saying that. And I'm like, well, not only is that a lie, but do you guys remember 1996? Because Time magazine put up a cover that bragged about how we bought the election in Russia. We stole an election for Boris Yeltsin, our man, because we needed him to be in control so that we could continue to exploit Russia economically and dominate Russia politically to keep Russia down. That was the policy. And then Boris Yeltsin stepped aside and he turned the reins of power over to a guy named Vladimir Putin in 1999. And Putin wasn't playing that game. So now we come back to that boxer scenario. You saw Scott Ritter suddenly get diabetic, fat, and I'm no longer a boxer. And you're like, Ritter, I don't have time for you. I don't have to talk to you. When I sit down with you, I'm going to dictate a solution to you. I really want to hear what you're saying because you're weak and pathetic. I don't care about you. Now Scott Ritter steps aside. Mike Tyson steps in. And you're like, oops. Now I got to talk, but you're not ready to talk like that. You're still treating Mike Tyson like he's nothing, like a nobody. And Tyson's like, well, okay, I'll sit here and talk to you a little bit, but I could knock you out if I wanted to. I'm not the guy you think I am. I'm actually pretty strong, but I don't want to knock you out. I'd like to work with you. I'd like to do this peaceful cooperation thing, but you have to treat me with a little bit more respect than you are. America never learned how to treat Vladimir Putin with respect. We always wanted him to be like Boris Yeltsin. We always wanted Russia to be weak, like it was in the 1990s. And when Vladimir Putin came in and said, nah, I'm going to sort of stand up on my own 2 feet and I'm going to bring my country out of the doldrums and actually raise the standard of living and make us a nation that can be proud again. And I want you to sit down and work with me as equals. We couldn't handle that. We have an entire generation of what I call Putin whisperers, people like Michael McFaul, the former ambassador, people like Fiona Hill. She was on in the impeachment hearings about Donald Trump. She was a key factor there. She's somebody who hates Vladimir Putin. Angela Stent. There's a whole host of other people who came into academic prominence by writing PhD theses that basically said Vladimir Putin is the most evil man on the planet. That is literally the most ignorant statement you could possibly make. I'm not going to sit here and try and sell you Vladimir Putin. Not my job. But I am here to tell you that everything you've heard about Vladimir Putin in the public sphere here in America is wrong. And everything you've heard about Russia is wrong. And that the establishment, don't want you to study Russia, to learn Russia, to find out the facts. Because if you do that, see, right now, they can get away with promoting policies that continue to prop America up as the singular, the most important nation in the world. The world gravitates around the United States. The rules-based international order. We've heard that many, many times. But that's predicated on America being strong and everybody else being weak. The worst thing that can happen to that thing is if Russia says, wait a minute, we want to stand up on our own 2 feet, not to confront you, but we want to be standing next to you. We sort of like, and hey, we'd like to bring our Chinese friends over and stand next to you too. Hey, India, why don't you come over here? South Africa, come on over, man. Everybody come on down. It's one big happy family. We're all equal in the eyes of the creator, a multipolar world. And America's going, that's not what we want. We want you all to go back into your mother's basements and be pathetic little trolls down there while we run the world for you. But they're like, no, we don't want to live in mommy's basement anymore. We're grown-ups. We want to come out. We want to walk the world as equals. And so everything we're doing as a nation is designed to keep everybody else down and keep ourselves up. And the way we can to do this against Russia is through Russophobia. You see, what is Russophobia? Russophobia is the fear of Russia that comes from what? It's fear that's derived from ignorance, because we don't know Russia. We don't understand. Look, it's the same thing with China. We don't know China. We don't understand China. So all we know about China is come Christmas morning, when we open up the packages, all that cool electronic stuff that we use, to play games, video games and all that, it's all said made in China. So we know we have to keep the supply chains going. We know enough. Most Americans are like, China, supply chains. Got to keep the supply chains going so we can get the cool electronics at Christmas. That's very important. So I can get my iPhone upgrade. That's very important. We don't know anything about China. And if we study China, it becomes pretty difficult. Like, for instance, go to New York City, ride around in the subway. Just a little bit. Don't too much. You'll get mugged. Right around the subway. Avoid the concrete falling down and hitting you on the head. And you might want to wear a little bit of raincoat because there's water dripping all over the place because it's leaking. And it stinks. And it's ugly. And it's just horrible. It's a horrible experience. Literally a horrible experience. Now, imagine if I gave you an airplane ticket and you fly to China and any city. I don't know, pick one. Go to the train station. And you're going, this is clean. Then the train shows up. And you're like, there's no graffiti. It's clean. It opens up, you walk in, you go, my God, this is a modern train. You sit down and whoosh, off it goes. It's called a bullet train for a reason, because it's a high-speed train on modern rails that are connecting you in efficient fashion with cities that are thousands of miles apart. Efficient travel like this, clean, modern. Go to Moscow, because we belittle the Russians all the time. Oh, those Russians, they all live in the forest and they play with bears and they're not really civilized people. Go to Moscow, go to their subway system. First thing is, you'll think you walked into a museum. You're, wait a minute, I can't be in a subway system because this is beautiful. They have paintings, they have statues. It's just gorgeous. I walked into a museum. Whoop, wait, there's a train. It's on time. And I got on the train and it takes me through to another gorgeous, clean station. And Vladimir Putin just built a new ring, a fifth ring around Moscow, new subway connectivity, all modern, all great. Vladimir Putin, that dictatorial guy that doesn't care about his people, just built one of the cleanest subway things. Now go to New York City and ask about that half-mile extension they're trying to do in Manhattan and how much that costs and why it's never going to be anything like the Russians just did. This is the point I'm trying to make. The people in power don't want you to know the truth about Russia or China or India or anything, because what they want to be able to tell you is you need to fear Russia. You need to fear China. Why? Because now from that fear, from the ignorance you now have fear. And now you're looking to them saying, well, how do you protect us against them? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because we're going to have a defense budget. I know like $800 billion sounds like a lot, but believe me, we need it to protect ourselves from those Russians, those Chinese, and even those pesky Indians are over there. We have to protect from everybody because they're going against the rules-based international order. Only America can tell the world. We are the exceptional nation. You've heard that before. We are the exceptional nation. And that's an extension. When again, do a little bit of checking into history. Where does exceptional nation come from? Reverse engineer it, manifest destiny. And what does manifest destiny mean? It means God has reached down from the heavens and touched Americans, but not any Americans, just us white guys. He only touched us at first, And so I'm now empowered by God to go across plains. Wait, there's red men there. Too bad, so sad. I'm sorry, Mr. Red Man. I'm going to kill you, murder you, slaughter you, steal your land. But there's black people back there working in the fields. That's how we can do this, man. We got black people slaving in the fields so we can get the income to push the man. God has touched us. And now when we get to the other end of the continent, we expand this into global manifest destiny. Now Americans have to go out, and we're not just Americans, we're Christians, because God has touched us. The Christian God, not the Muslim God, not the God of the Chinese, not the God of anybody. Just the American God has touched us now to go out and proselytize in the name of God around the world spreading Christianity and all that. That's how America interfaces with the world. That's literally what it is today. So when we say we're the exceptional nation, we're saying that God has blessed us, and therefore God has damned everybody else. Everybody else is lesser than us. Now, in America, we've had to come to accept the fact that, okay, black people are equal too. We didn't want to do it, but we did it. Okay, black Mexicans, damn it. Okay, well, Koreans, okay, if they come in and they call themselves Americans, then God touched them too. We'll accept that. But anybody who doesn't come in and call themselves American, I'm being facetious here, but it's the truth. You know it's the truth. And that's the insulting part. Because imagine now if you're a Russian with your Orthodox faith that predates America. So before God reached down and touched us in the 1800s, Russia had the Orthodox Church. I'm not here singing praises of the Orthodox Church. I'm just saying that it existed before God decided America was great. So some Russians like to believe that God thought Russia was pretty good back then too. Just like the Greeks like to think that God thought the Greeks were good. The Romans are like, hey, Catholicism, we were good too. And there's some other people that around the world saying, wait, we were the first Christians. God thought we were good too. And then there's the Jews who say, we're the chosen ones, baby. Then of course the Muslims come in and say, y'all got it wrong. Allah knows the best. God touched Allah. So God's been touching a lot of people before he touched Americans. But we're disrespectful of that. We're totally disrespectful of that, of every faith in the world. We disrespect every faith in the world. And that we disrespect all cultures in the world. We disrespect all peoples in the world because we are exceptional, which means they're not. How insulting can that be? And so that's automatically the way when Americans wake up in the morning, they may not know it. I mean, I think most Americans don't realize the inherent prejudice that exists within them just by being American. Because if you sit there and you turn on your television and you hear an American politician say, we are the exceptional nation, and you don't puke. If you go, okay, then you're the problem. You're the problem, not the politician. You're the problem because you just sat there and accepted it. You went, yeah, I can live with that. We're the exceptional nation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not the exceptional nation. I just told you the Chinese do better trains better than us. The Russians do subways better than us. Everybody does things better than us. We're okay. We could be better, but we're not the greatest thing in the world. There's a whole world out there filled with billions of people, most of whom are smarter than the average American. I mean, that's just a sad statement of fact. If I took a Russian history text into an American school, opened it up and asked Americans about Russian history, they'd all go, I mean, hell, I could take an American history book into an American school, open it up, and they'd still go, what? There was a revolution? Really? I could take that book to Russia, open it up, and they'll tell me everything about it because they study it, because they're curious about the world they live in. See, the Russians are actually good global citizens. The Chinese are even better global citizens because they have economic reach. China just is something amazing. I'm jumping all around here. I know that. You can shut me up anytime you want to. China just, we've been instigating trouble in the Middle East forever. I mean, we just had, I think, Nick Price come out and say, America's been the most stabilizing factor in the Middle East. If it wasn't for America, the Middle East would have descended into chaos. And I'm like, dude, have you looked at the Middle East lately? It's already descended into chaos, and it's because of America. We are singularly responsible for everything bad happening in the Middle East today. And one of the things we've been doing is encouraging a war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We've been doing that. We had the Abrams Accord, which was going to bring Israel into the mix. So now the Israelis and the Saudis are going to work together to form a crescent of chaos to confront the Iranians in that area. And the Chinese went, crescent of chaos. That's bad for business. You see, it's very difficult for us to do business in an area where there's chaos rating. So the Chinese stepped in and went, hey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, I'm here. Guys, we need peace. We need you to sit down, shake hands, start diplomatic relations, get that non-aggression thing back up and start working together towards a better world. And the Saudis and the Iranians went, we like that. We like that idea of peace. America's never offered peace. America only offers war. We like peace. So they did the deal. And now, and a lot of people are going, well, that just resets the clock. That just takes it back to 7 years ago. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, well, there's a thing called BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It's this economic forum that's challenging the G7. People know the G7, the seven most influential economies in the world: the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Canada, Italy, all of them. But if you chart out their gross domestic product and then you convert it to a purchasing power parity, PPP, and you put it on a chart, something interesting happened last year. The actual real purchasing power of the BRICS companies, just the countries, just those ones I named, went up while the G7 went down. They crossed over. BRICS is more powerful economically than the G7. Shh, don't tell the G7, they'll get really upset. But now here's the thing about BRICS. The G7, they're never going to be anymore in the G7. They used to be the G8, but they kicked the Russians out. And the Russians went to BRICS, so it doesn't matter. But the G7 is the G7. That's it. They're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Germany's economy is collapsing. Great Britain's economy, they're in recession already. Our banks are failing. We might go into recession. You know whose banks aren't failing? Russia. They just aren't failing because they have sound economic practices. But Saudi Arabia and Iran's already submitted an application to BRICS and has been approved. So they're going to become a BRICS. Saudi Arabia is going, we want some of that too. So they're going to apply. Everybody's applying. Everybody's rushing to join the winning team of BRICS. So remember that graph where they had that crossover? BRICS is going up, is going down. BRICS is about ready to hit afterburner. They're going to get some of that nitric oxide to put on the back of their car and hit the button and boom, just like what's that movie with Vin Diesel?
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious. They got that. They always have that little button they hit. Hit the button, and then they go. So BRICS is going to hit the button. Wham goes every time because they're getting every big player. Meanwhile, we're just getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And you know who did that? China. I think God reached out and touched China. I think China is the special nation now.
We have a question in the chat from Slav Legend. I'm going to highlight it and then you can take it. He says, "Can you ask Scott if he knows anything about the British intelligence helping to start the Russian Civil War to collapse Russia?"
Actually, I do, because I was a Russian history major, and this is one of the aspects that I enjoyed. First of all, you have to understand that the animosity that existed between Britain, Great Britain, United Kingdom, and Imperial Russia was linked to not just the competition of empires, and they did. I mean, there was this whole thing called the Great Game that was being played out on the Indian frontier, which at that time included Pakistan, but Afghanistan, and then you had Bukhara and Kokand and all these other khanates up there. And the Russians are moving this way, and the British are moving this way. And the Great Game was played on that, Himalayan Afghan frontier. So there's all that stuff going on. They had the King of England was related to the King of Russia. They didn't like each other too much. So British politics, but then the communists came and they killed the Russian king. And the British are going, they killed a king. You can't kill a king. You're not allowed to kill a king. And then on top of that, the communists, Russia was part of this alliance that was fighting the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians and such. And then the Russians pulled out of the war. We're very unhappy about that because that allowed Germany to divert troops, come in and launch offensives in 1918, early 1918, that almost won the war for them. And so there was animosity. So Britain started deploying forces. The British deployed forces up into Murmansk and Archangel. So did the United States. I don't think a lot of Americans know that. We sent these units from Michigan and Wisconsin. They were supposed to go to the Western Front, fight the Germans, and they got diverted and sent. And instead, they were fighting Bolsheviks up in Murmansk and Archangel. So very bloody fighting, very difficult fighting under Britain, and we suffered a lot of casualties. And we did it. But the British came in Vladivostok in the Far East. So did the Americans. We came in too. We invaded Russia twice. Once from Murmansk, once from Vladivostok. But the British came in also through the Caspian Sea into the Caucasus, trying to overthrow Russian rule in the Caucasus, and they were working the angle in through China and all that. So you had all this British intrigue going around the corner, around the periphery of the Soviet Union. And the British played a very important role in encouraging, for instance, the operations of Wrangel in the Crimea. They supported the Kolchak in the east, Kolchak's forces. They had another guy coming out of the Baltics that they were supporting. So the British were supporting everybody. The British were also, playing a role in intrigue in Central Asia. So yeah, British intelligence was behind it. One of the more interesting things that I've done. I'm a historian by. It's my. I'm an amateur historian. I don't make too much money doing it. I've written a couple of books, but nobody buys them. But I got to go to the British library and gain access. I got a letter of introduction that allowed me to get up into the archives, and I was able to get the reporting of British intelligence agents during this time and read the actual reports that they had written about their work in targeting the Soviet Union. So yeah, Britain's been a big part of this, and that intrigue carried on. I'm getting a little off topic here, but if you go look at, just a while ago, we had the anniversary of Winston Churchill, the famous British Prime Minister. He gave a speech in Fulton, Missouri in 1946. And that was his famous Iron Curtain speech, where an Iron Curtain has descended down across Europe and all that. So it sort of began the beginning of containment and the Cold War, that speech. And the thing that was driving him was anger with the Soviet Union about Poland and the Polish policy. And if you study the narrative that the West puts out, it's all about Stalin betraying commitments that were made at Yalta and Potsdam, and Stalin's the bad guy, the evil Soviets, until you read the archives. And then first of all, you get Stalin telling certain people that, we're not going to support you because you're taking British money to kill Red Army soldiers. And we shed our blood to liberate you. Now you're killing us, taking British money. We got problems. And I'm going, really? Did they really take British money? And then you study and you find out that half the Polish, the people that were part of the London group of Poles, were working for British Special Operations Executive to collect intelligence against the Soviet target, and then later to create armed resistance against the Red Army. And suddenly, this whole concept of Stalin being the bad guy becomes a little bit more complicated than that. I'm not here to say that everything the Russians did. I'm not saying that Russia didn't have, or the Soviet Union didn't have some ulterior motives and all that stuff. But it ain't black and white, ladies and gentlemen. History is a lot more complicated than you might possibly think. And when you get British intelligence involved, and I know because I worked very closely with British intelligence for a period of time, for MI6, for the Defense and Intelligence Service, for others, GCHQ, they're eavesdroppers. I work with all of them very intimately, and I know how they operate. I know what they do. I know who they are, and they cause trouble around the world. There's a term, again, boxing term. First of all, I have to tell everybody, I boxed a little bit, but it was only recreational. I never got in a fight in my life, and I just tried to get in shape. But I love boxing. I love the concept of boxing as an athletic event. But there's a term, punching above your weight. So if you're somebody who's very aggressive, and you come in and you start punching, it's like a middleweight going up against a heavyweight. Not a good thing to do. Heavyweight knocks you out. British intelligence has been punching above its weight for some time now. They're out there. They're small, but they think they're capable of accomplishing really, really big things, and sometimes they do. But one of the things they wanted to accomplish, getting back to the original question, is they wanted to collapse Russia by supporting all these elements that were conspiring against the new Bolshevik government during the Russian Civil War.
One more, but I have to address the boxing thing, because even though I'm a martial artist, my favorite martial art is boxing, even though I'm not a boxer. I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu, blue belt in Judo. I'm a student instructor in Nabard Combat and a black belt in Yoshikai. I've been doing that all my life. My brothers, my father, it's just, and even my children do it. I had to say that because I love boxing. When you brought up boxing, my mom, when I go over to her house, sometimes she said, "You know, you love boxing." I just love the sweet science. But
Yeah, oh, something else. Yeah.
yeah, Alexandria Black says, "Why were they furious at that piece?" I think she's referring to what China just did with Saudi Arabia and Iran. Could you address her question?
Well, sure. First of all, it disrupts everything. All we have to do is go back a couple years in the final moments of um, the Trump administration, and they came up with a deal they called the Abrams Accords. And the Abrams Accords were basically where the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, I think, were agreeing to normalize relations with Israel, to open up embassies, to exchange. And that was seen as an opportunity to get Israel plugged into the Gulf Arab world. They wanted Saudi Arabia to normalize, Kuwait to normalize, etc. And the idea wasn't to make peace break out; it was the opposite. The idea was to have that crescent of conflict that we talked about between the Saudis, Saudi-controlled Arabs, now infused with Israeli support against Iran. And that's what everybody bet down on. That's the whole American strategy in the Middle East is contingent upon Saudi Arabia, backed by Israel, working with other Gulf Arab states to contain and then ultimately defeat Iran through chaos and conflict. And so when China steps in and says, "Nah, we're not going to play that game. We're going to make peace instead," we just disrupted everything. The entire American vision of what we wanted to do in the Middle East has been wiped clean. Not only that, they've taken Saudi Arabia out of our exclusive orbit. See, the importance of Saudi Arabia is all about oil. Now, people are going to say, "Well, come on, Scott, America's self-sufficient in oil. We don't need Saudi oil." Yes, we do, you see, because oil is a commodity that's traded on the open market. And even if we're self-sufficient in oil, the price of oil is linked to what traders around the world say it should be. And that's why we built Saudi Arabia. Yes, we built Saudi Arabia. We cut a deal with the Saudi king, and we came in, we created something called Aramco, the Arab American Oil Company. And Aramco was built with overcapacity designed in. Now, oil is expensive stuff. You don't find too many nations that build capacity, billion-dollar capacity, and then don't use it. But why would Saudi Arabia do that? Why would Saudi Arabia build 12 million barrel production capacity a day, only produce 9? Because Saudi Arabia is now the gas pedal of the world oil-based economy. And when America picks up the phone and says, "Saudi, pump her up, baby, get the oil production up because we need more oil to lower the price," the Saudis go, "Yes, sir, because you're protecting us from all those evil Iranians with your wonderful military equipment. And we remember how you came to our defense against Iraq back in 1991. So we're with you." And they hit the acceleration button and they do it, even though it disrupts their economy because it's lowering the price of oil and all that. Then we can call them up and say, "Nah, oil's too low. American producers can't produce. We need to get the price up." Saudi Arabia, take the foot off the pedal, and Saudi Arabia lowers the production. Price of oil goes up, and we're happy. And so America's in control of the global economy just by picking up the phone to the Saudis. That's a little oversimplification, but it's pretty much dead on right. Now, what has Saudi Arabia done? First of all, if you remember last summer, not last summer, was it last summer? Summer 2020, yeah, last summer. Joe Biden in July made his trip to Saudi Arabia. That was the trip where he crawled to Saudi Arabia on his knees. Because you remember when Joe Biden ran for president, he said, "I will never do business with Saudi Arabia. They killed Jamal Khashoggi. They cut him up. They butchered his body. They destroyed him in acid, and they are evil, and I will never deal with them. I'm going to treat them like pariahs. They're pariahs." Well, problem is, Joe, those pariahs still have the gas pedal, and suddenly you are confronted, Joe, with a situation where oil prices were crazy and American oil producers were basically going out of business, and the self-sufficiency aspect was gone, and we were sanctioning Russia and Russian markets. And we said, "My God, we need those Saudis." So the man you said you would never deal with, The man you said you would treat as a pariah, you would never shake his hand, Joe, would you? Nope, you crawled to him, Joe. Crawled. And you bowed before him, and you kissed his ring, and you shook his hand, and you went in there, and you begged, and you begged, and you begged, and he told you no. He told you no. And that was the beginning of the end. You see, the Saudis are tired of this game. They're tired of America telling them what to do. Saudi Arabia has a vision. They call it 2030, Vision 2030. I think that's still the right number. But the idea is they're going to take this wealth and transform Saudi Arabia because they know, they see the writing on the wall. They're not going to sell oil forever. And they need to start doing more to make the Saudi economy more diverse so that when the global reliance on oil drops, they have something that's there that sustains the wealth and the standard of living that the Saudi people have grown accustomed to. So, it's about societal transformation, building up the infrastructure, everything. But to do that, you need to make money. And being America's gas pedal, you don't make money. Your economy is now held prisoner by America. You're making America money, but you're not making money. So the Saudis are not happy with that. The Chinese, on the other hand, they don't ask the Saudi Arabians to do anything other than sell them oil. The Saudis are going, wait a minute, for 2030 to work, we have to sell oil. China wants to buy oil. They want to buy a lot of oil, and they aren't going to play games. They just want to buy oil. We're going to sell China oil. And then then they look over and they're saying, America wants us to go to war with Iran. But we're at war in Yemen with the Houthi. The Iranians support the Houthi. The Iranians gave the Houthi drones. And the drones, they flew in and they shut down our oil production for a while. So if we go to war with Iran, we don't produce oil. We can't sell it to the Chinese. And 2030 will never happen. We'll go back to the Stone Age. America hates us. I think that's what the only conclusion you can reach for a society is America hates us. They want us to do things that are going to result in our destruction. So we're not playing that game anymore. Chinese came in, said, make peace, open up economic opportunities. And Saudi Arabia did that. That's why they hate the peace plan, because this actually brings peace, not conflict. This actually empowers Saudi Arabia and Iran, not the United States. That's why the United States hates it.
Before I ask you a question on the MQ-9 drone and read something that you wrote on Sputnik, Tonio wants to know, here is his question. Let me highlight it for you. Tonio wants to know, do you know the Georgian journalist Levan Gudaz? I'm butchering, yeah. And your thoughts on it, if you know.
I don't, but what I would ask Tonio to do is, if you move on to the next question, if Tonio could give me just a brief idea why Levan, because I know Georgia very well. I know all the problems that are in Georgia right now. I can talk about that, but I can't claim that I know the Georgian journalist Levan Gudadzi. But if you can link Levan to a specific problem going on in Georgia, I can talk about that problem. But I'd have to go Google the guy right now. And maybe once I Google him, I go, oh yeah, I know all about this. But I'm not going to pretend that I know something that I don't know. And so I can't answer that question straight up.
Okay. So transitioning over to an article that you did on Sputnik News, MQ-9 drone incident, Biden's dangerous escalation. In the article you wrote, it said you wrote, a U.S. surveillance drone crashed off the coast of Crimea after an encounter with a Russian fighter aircraft. What does this incident say about the current state of the war in Ukraine and where Russia and the U.S. might go from here? And it says, in 2015, the United States established a permanent training facility in Yaroviv, Western Ukraine, for the express purpose of training Ukrainian soldiers for combat against Russia. Why would the U.S. Well, I know why, but I have to pose the question to you. Why would the U.S. do such a thing and turn Slavic brothers against each other? And what was the purpose of Russia downing the drone?
The Reaper drone. Remember, we had a previous talk about Putin coming into power and how that angered certain people. Back in 2009, Barack Obama became president, and his chief Russian advisor was a guy named Michael McFaul. And Michael McFaul advised Obama that the problem is Putin, but that we, the United States, have been given a window of opportunity. You see, because Putin was constrained by the Russian Constitution. Wait a minute, how can a dictator be constrained by the Russian Constitution? That's a different question. So this dictator who decided that the Constitution is actually the rule of law is important, he had to step aside because the Constitution said he could only serve 2 consecutive terms. So he stepped aside. He became prime minister, and the prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev, became president. And so Michael McFaul, because he's dumber than dirt and doesn't know anything about Russia and anything, because he's stupid, as all the Putin whisperers are. And I hate to say, because he's a PhD, he's a professor at Stanford, a fine institution. But I'm just here to tell you right now, Michael McFaul knows nothing about Russia, because if he did, he would never have bought into this notion. But he said, "Hey, Mr. President, why don't we go to the Russians now and pretend to be their friends? Why don't we go to Medvedev and say, we can make things happen for you. All those things that we didn't do for Putin, we can do for you. But all you have to do is keep Putin out of power. We never want him to come back to be president. Putin has to go. You have to come. But we'd like you, right now you got nice dark hair and you're sort of physically fit. We need you to get gray hair and become fat, and we're going to rename you Boris Yeltsin, because that's what we want. We want the next Boris Yeltsin. We want you to be Boris Yeltsin." And Medvedev's like, nah, my name's Dmitry Medvedev, and I am who I am. But he did play the game a little bit. He was like, okay, he opened the door, he trusted America, and he got, I can't use the word, well, he got jammed. He got jammed by the Americans several times. One in Libya, where he was told that, that Gaddafi was a threat, but there was going to be United Nations effort to contain Gaddafi. Instead, it turned into a NATO regime change that had humiliated Medvedev. And the other one was missile defense. He wanted this new, the treaty we talked about at the beginning, the New START treaty. They started negotiating it when Medvedev was the president. And Medvedev said, we can't have a treaty without missile defense. We're very concerned about your missile defense activities. And Obama, under the reset, said, trust me on this one. I can't get the Strategic Arms Treaty to pass the Senate ratification process if we linked missile defense to it. So let's get this done first, but I promise you that I will come back and re-engage in good faith, because my name's Barack Hussein Obama, and my lips, when they move, only the truth comes out. I never lie. Never lie. And Medvedev went, okay, I could trust you on that one. But Obama was lying, because the second they got that treaty ratified and the Russians started sitting down going, we're ready to talk about missile defense, they went, no, we're not going to do missile defense, and left Medvedev hanging. So Medvedev's sitting there. Meanwhile, McFaul is trying to get this Russian reset. They did this stupid little yellow box with a red button, and they put the Russian word for reset, but it wasn't reset. It was overcharge. So it's the wrong word, wrong implication. Again, shows you how stupid McFaul is. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that. My wife will get very mad at me because I'm not supposed to belittle people, but he truly is a stupid man. Michael, if you're watching, I'm sorry, you're stupid. So he brings this box, he gives it to Hillary Clinton. She goes up and brings up to Lavrov, and they're supposed to have this moment where they both push the button, and U.S.-Russian relations have reset, as if none of the bad things we did to Russia ever happened. We've reset. It's all okay, except it was all a lie, because it wasn't about Russian reset. It was about regime change, getting Vladimir Putin never again to run for office, and weakening Dmitry Medvedev with lies, so that he became Boris Yeltsin, and we once again seized control of the Russian economy. We once again dominated Russian politics. That was the direction that we wanted to go. But then Putin's sort of like the Energizer Bunny. He just doesn't go away. The amazing thing happened. He said he's going to run for election, but in 2010 or 2011, March 2011, Joe Biden, name that might sound familiar to us today, but Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States, and he flew to Moscow. And what I'm going to tell you is the God's honest truth. He flew to Moscow and he met with the Russian opposition. That's the opposition that we bought and paid for. Again, get my brain going, and I sort of go all over the place. But did you watch the Oscars last Sunday?
No, I don't.
Probably not. Probably most people did, but some people did. I did, I have to admit, because I wanted Maverick to win. I'm a big Top Gun fan, but so I was disappointed. But there was a documentary called Navalny about this Russian opposition figure, and it won the Oscar for best documentary. And it's just ridiculous as the day is long, because if you know anything about Navalny, you know he's a CIA asset. I can actually tell you where he was recruited, because it's quite obvious when you read the records. But nobody wants to talk about it. They talk about this great Democrat. He's not a Democratic leader. He's a racist. He uses bad words. The N word that we're not allowed to use in the United States for cause, he uses the Russian version of that word to talk about people in the Caucasus. He's a racist. He's a white supremacist. He's a horrible human being. And he's as corrupt as the day is long. And the CIA bought him. And they bought all the opposition leaders. So here comes, Joe Biden comes into Moscow, the capital city of Russia. It's not like he's meeting in Boston or in San Francisco. He's going to Moscow, and he meets with the opposition that the CIA has bought and paid for, and he sits down with them and publicly says it would be a bad idea for Vladimir Putin to run for president again. It would be bad for Putin, and it would be bad for Russia. Now, does that sound like a threat? It's not like a threat to me. So the vice president comes in, talks to the opposition that the CIA has bought and paid for, and says it would be a bad idea for Putin to run for office again. Well, Putin being Putin said, I'll take that risk. And he ran for office, and he won election. And he became president in March of 2012. But since that time, we have been furious at him. So this regime change policy went from being simply trying to bribe Dmitry Medvedev into transforming into Boris Yeltsin into, we have to find a way to physically overthrow Vladimir Putin. And that became the policy. And again, the president that was doing this was Nobel Peace Prize winning Barack Hussein Obama. I just want to put that in perspective there, ladies and gentlemen. The man who got the Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing didn't live up to the promise of the Nobel Peace Prize, because he pursued one of the most dangerous policies ever, one that has come back to haunt us today: regime change against Vladimir Putin. Now, how did we do that? In 2014, we orchestrated a coup in Ukraine. Why? Because everybody understood that Ukraine, in the Soviet Union time, Ukraine and Russia were linked together in the Soviet Union. And the Ukrainian economy, all the schools, everything was a part of Soviet life. And then when they broke up, Ukraine became independent, but still was a heavy factor into Russia. And so if we could strip Ukraine away from the Russian orbit, we could weaken Russia, collapse it, to get rid of Vladimir Putin. So we orchestrated a coup d'etat. Victoria Nuland was senior, the name today, she's up there, the lady responsible for all bad things that happen in the world. Well, she was responsible for bad things too. She was the person responsible for Ukraine policy. They intercepted a phone call while this coup was taking place, before they succeeded in overthrowing the constitutionally elected Ukrainian president through a violent coup. I always laugh because, I'm not here to defend what happened on January 6th. I'm very upset with what happened on January 6th. I'm not supporting that at all. Violence against the nation's capital, even if some people say, well, it was exaggerated, it was still violence. They still disrupted an Article 12 proceeding, the Constitution mandated Congress to do. You can't do that. You can't interfere with the process of the Constitution at all. That's at least my limited understanding of it. But we talk about that. And I'm like, but did you guys see what we did in Kiev? In Kiev, we actually raised up the Nazis. We gave them weapons. We put them in the square, and they murdered hundreds of people, not hundreds, scores of people. We gave the Nazis weapons to kill, murder people, to overthrow a government. That's an insurrection, ladies and gentlemen. You compare and contrast what happened in February of 2014 with what happened on January 6th. One is a walk in the park. The other one is violence, like political violence you've never seen. We were responsible for that in Kiev. We overthrew the government. We installed a Nazi-supported government populated by Nazis. For what purpose? To create a war with Russia. How do we know this? William Burns, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia in 2008, wrote a memorandum called Net Means Net. That means Russians won't accept Ukraine joining NATO. And the conclusion was, if we invite Ukraine to join NATO, this will lead to a series of escalating events that will result in Russia eventually militarily intervening in Ukraine. And Ukraine will lose Crimea and the Donbass region. Sounds pretty familiar because Russia did military intervene and Ukraine lost Crimea and the Donbass, and they've lost a lot more than that. So William Burns was onto something there. But what did we do? Knowing what he said, knowing the cause and effect relationship between extending an invitation and the inevitability of a Russian military intervention, we invited Ukraine to join NATO, which means we wanted a war. This was what we wanted. Now, how do we get that war? We launch a coup d'etat in Kiev to oust the pro-Russian president, install our guy, Victoria Nuland, on the phone, our boy Yatsenko, the man who became the prime minister. We handpicked him and all the other Nazis that were in there. Yep, it's American-controlled government, ladies and gentlemen. We did that. And so now we have it, and a civil war breaks out. A civil war that's predicated on the notion that ethnic Russians are terrorists. The Nazis determined it so they're now in there slaughtering the ethnic Russians, and Russia went, you can't do that. So Russia started supporting them. Now we have this conflict going on. Well, in 2014, that conflict didn't go too well for the Ukrainian government. You see, they got up there in the Donetsk area, and they got surrounded by the Russians, and the Russians were going to kill them all, literally. 15,000 Ukrainian boys were going to heaven. The Ukrainian president panicked, went to France and Germany and got them to intervene, got the two leaders, Francois Hollande, the French president, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, to call up Vladimir Putin, their good friend Vlad, and say, we need peace. And Vlad's sitting there going, wait a minute, these guys come running in here, raping and murdering our ethnic Russians. We finally got them where we want them. And I can end this thing right now. And you're telling me you want peace? We want peace. We promise we want peace. Peace, 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 please, please, pretty please. And Vlad went, okay, we'll do the peace thing. And it turned out it was all a lie because they weren't doing the peace thing. See, in 2014 and then later 2015, another version of the Accords, we promised a ceasefire that would lead to the resolution of this problem. But the Ukrainians never implemented the deal, and France and Germany never pressured them to do. Instead, the United States builds a military training facility in Western Kiev, whose sole purpose is to train 1 battalion of Ukrainian forces every 55 days to NATO standards for the sole purpose of going over to the east and killing Russians in the Donbass. That's what we were doing. We were training them to kill Russians at a time when we claimed we wanted peace. But now Petro Poroshenko, the former Ukrainian president, Francois Hollande, and Angela Merkel, the two guarantors of the Minsk Accords, have all come out and said straight up, it was a sham. We were never going to implement Minsk, ever. We were buying time for this military to be trained and equipped to go to war against Russia. So that's why the United States had a military training facility in Western Ukraine. It was part of an overall effort to basically create the capability to fight a war against Russia. And now they got it, but we guessed wrong because the Russians are kicking the Ukrainians' butt.
I want to go back to something you said concerning the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Mr. Obama. I've often said this, that I believe that he was the most detrimental president to Black America. And I've also said that he implemented some of the most egregious policies towards not just America, but specifically Black America. And had it been George Bush or anyone else that implemented the policies that he implemented, that it would have been outrage everywhere. The destroying of Libya and the raping of a world leader. And when he did that, I remember watching a documentary on Vladimir Putin, and they say Vladimir Putin watched that over and over and over again. And he felt betrayed because the West had given assurances that Gaddafi would be left alone. And after that, the relationship between the West and Russia never rebounded and never quite bounced back. Why is it that nobody talks about this? The policies implemented by Obama, he has bombed more Black countries than all of his predecessors before him. He has bombed more Muslim nations than all of his predecessors before him. And he has implemented some of the most egregious and heinous policies towards Latin America, Africa, and Eurasia that has ever been implemented. Why is he? Why is nobody talking about it? Is it because they are afraid? Because he's black? It doesn't matter if you're black, you're white, you're brown, you're red, purple, green, or yellow, or have polka dots on you. If you implemented policies that are egregious and that amount to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and things like that, this should be addressed.
I thought you liked me. I thought you liked me. And now you ask me the question that if I answer it, I'm going to get in trouble. But, my whole thing is to be on. Look, I don't claim to be a sociologist. I'm just an average American citizen who looks at things. But do you want me to answer that question? I'll answer the question from what I think. A couple things. One, Barack Obama was not your traditional black American politician. He grew up in Hawaii, and he grew up in a privileged lifestyle in Hawaii. He went to Harvard Law School, and he never had your traditional black experience. This isn't somebody who worked his way up through the through from the ghetto to the top. He was privileged his entire life, so we have to understand that. Two, he was inherently unqualified for the job. He had no foreign policy experience. He didn't know the world at all. He was a Chicago social worker, advocate, and that constitutional scholar, but no real practical application in that. So he was a pretty face with the right color skin and an exotic name that the Democratic Party used. That's it. That's straight up it. Now, let's talk about his policies. You can tell a lot about Barack Obama by who he picked as his vice president. Because Joe Biden's the most racist man that walks the face of the earth today. If you're a black person, you think Joe Biden's on your side, you haven't been watching or listening to Joe Biden at all. The man is a straight up racist. And Barack Obama knows it because Joe Biden got picked up on an open mic talking about, listening to Barack, well, he cleans up pretty good and he's pretty articulate for one of them. Them what? Them what? Are you saying that black people can't be clean and articulate? Is that what you're saying, Joe? Yes, that is what you're saying. Go, because you're a racist, straight up racist. I mean, Joe Biden is the guy that was behind these laws that put black men in prison in overwhelming numbers. That's Joe Biden that did that. And Barack Obama picked him to be his vice president. Not just his, they were a partnership. Normally vice presidents are like Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush. They don't like each other. They hated each other. They despised each other. But politics said that because George Herbert Walker Bush got the second greatest number of votes at the convention, he was going to be the vice president. But here, Barack Obama picked old Sleepy Joe. Why? I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you why. Now this is what's going to get me in trouble, because this is where you're going to, I don't know about you, but people might get angry at me. This is just my observations. Because Joe Biden is the modern plantation master. And he's a big name in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is controlled by white people who use black people to empower white people. And there is a whole category of black leaders who have bought into this system. These are leaders of cities, of areas that basically the black vote exists to be mobilized at election time. Promises are made. The blacks vote Democratic. The white people get voted into office. And then the blacks are forgotten and put back onto the plantation to do whatever black people do in off election years because the white people don't care. And the black leaders that empower this, they use this system to empower themselves. And I'm not going to use names because I don't want to, but there's some very big names out there, people who ran places like Baltimore and other places, and Baltimore never got better, and Atlanta never got better, and black communities never got better. But these guys got more powerful, they got richer, they got wealthier, because at a moment's notice, the phone would ring and white Democratic power would say, mobilize the blacks. And the good old boy would say, black people rise up, come over, vote, go back, and Joe Biden was the white plantation master that made that happen. He was the white guy to make that happen. And the black community, look what happened when the time came, when Joe Biden faced crisis in the 2020 election, in the summer of 2020. It was the South Carolina black politician that stepped up and did the deed. He gave the black vote to Joe Biden when Joe Biden needed the black vote. That wasn't democracy. Joe Biden didn't have a chance. First of all, how could Joe Biden possibly win a debate in front of a black audience? Because anybody would just say, Joe, what about the laws that you passed? And Joe would go, oh, he's the worst candidate ever. And yet the gentleman from South Carolina, very, very prominent politician, stepped up and said, the blacks will vote for Joe Biden. Now, if you're a black person, I would be furious if somebody came up and said, all white people will vote for Donald Trump. I mean, what are you talking about? All white people are going to vote for Donald Trump. All white people ain't the same. You know, just because we have a certain color skin doesn't mean we're all the same. We think differently. We have different backgrounds. But, you know, don't stop talking about, you know, as a voting block. And I would hope that black people would get upset if somebody says all black people will vote for this person. I would imagine people go, why are you saying all black people? I mean, I'm a person. I'm an individual. I have my own beliefs, my own values. I might share them with a community that's predominantly black. And yes, statistically, we all might vote the same way. But it's sort of demeaning and belittling when you just say that the Democratic Party owns the black vote, especially when you look at the history of how the Democratic Party treats black Americans, and they've treated them like dog poop for decades. They used the black vote to empower themselves. They used the black vote to empower a select few black politicians who live very good lifestyles, while the rest of black America is left where they're left. So that's my answer. And I hope I didn't infuriate you. I hope you don't beat me up with all your martial arts skills. But that was my answer. You asked the question, so I gave you the answer. And I honestly believe this. If I'm wrong, I'm more than happy to have people come up and tell me how I'm wrong, why I'm wrong, because I said I'm not a professional sociologist. I don't study race relationships in America for a living. I'm a foreign policy kind of guy. But I live in this country, and I have two eyeballs, I have two ears that are connected to a brain, and I see what I see. And what I see is Joe Biden being one of the most racist white guys in America, that he is part of a Democratic Party that has not treated the black people properly. They use the black people. And I see Barack Hussein Obama being one of the most unqualified people ever to be elected to president. And then he treats not just black America, but all of the world, the people of color in the world, like garbage. And then they gave him a Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing. And then after he got it,
yeah, the basketball on his finger, man. I tell you. But Scott, I know you have things to do. I want to ask you just a few more questions, but I want to go back to something you said about this group think. Well, you have to understand that it's intrinsic. They have set up a system in the black community, the urban community, from the churches to the to all kind of programs that they've and it is being instilled, and anywhere you go is vote this or vote that. It's like a group think thing, and if you speak out against that, you become a pariah. And I think that is some of the most detrimental policies that have been imposed upon urban or black America, and I think they're trying to do it with the Latinos and other minorities. But
can I just throw something in there just to give some background? In the lead up to the Iraq War, I was actually invited down to Washington D.C. by the Nation of Islam, and I showed up, and it was fascinating to watch because the crowd was huge. And I was literally the only white person there. But they wanted to hear about Iraq, and they wanted to talk about that. But so that was my first experience with the Nation of Islam, and they were well organized, very disciplined, and they had some very big bodyguards because I think there were some people that didn't want me to speak at the Nation of Islam because I look like this. But it was a great event, et cetera. Later on, when I was a firefighter, and I got to work with some firefighters from Mount Vernon outside of New York City, and I met them at the New York State Fire Academy. We're going through a fire instructor course, and one was a captain, the other one was a rank and file firefighter. But they invited me to come do ride-alongs with them, and for a volunteer firefighter to be able to do a ride-along, an operational ride-along with a professional fire crew, it's an honor and a privilege because professional firefighters don't like volunteers. But they allowed me to come in, and when you ride in, it wasn't just a tourist thing. I was a firefighter, so when we went to the house, I was on the crew that went in and fought fires with them. But long story short, the crew, I was riding with their rescue. So they're elite crew. But the shift that I was on, all the firefighters were black. And I mean, I know that Mount Vernon has a high black percentage of populations, but every other firefighter in the department was white. They had put all the black firefighters in the same crew because none of the white firefighters wanted to work with the black firefighters. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is in the 2000s in the United States of America. White firefighters wouldn't work with black firefighters. But a lot of the black firefighters were Nation of Islam guys, and the reason why I bring this up is, I would spend a lot of time. When you do a ride along, it's 24 hours, and you're living with them, you're eating with them, you're sleeping with them, you're working with them. And I did this a couple times, so I got to know these guys pretty well, and we became good friends. And but there was other black firefighters in the thing, but the other black firefighters were traditional Christian, blacks. So they had this link to the church and the Nation of Islam. And talking, I'd sit there and listen to the conversations, and there was resentment amongst the Nation of Islam about the sellout of the church blacks. And talking about just what you talked about, the linkage of the church community, mobilizing people and all that. And the Nation of Islam going, no. You see, you're actually doing the bidding of the white man. I mean, they were very honest with me. I mean, they said that I was pretty cool, but that there was a lot of resentment about racism in America, and I saw it. I mean, I'm just sitting there going, yeah, I can see why you guys may be resentful because all the white firefighters. We'd go to fires, and the white guys would pull me and say, "Why are you riding with them?" Because they invited me to. Why are you riding with them? Because they're firefighters. But why are you riding with them? And I said, wait a minute. By them, do you mean black people? Yes. Where this conversation's over. I mean, I got invited by a professional firefighter to ride along on a professional crew. And I never, anyways, it was an eye opener. But I only bring that up because when I talk about what I said about the black leadership in the communities, it's linked to some practical real life experience. I'm not claiming that I'm a civil rights leader and all that. No, I'm not. I rode on a fire truck with some great firefighters who happen to be black, who happen to be part of the Nation of Islam. And in meeting with them, we had some conversations about racial problems in America today. But that's sort of the background that I bring to this.
Jay Blue says when referring to the presidents, they all answer to a higher power. They are selected, not elected. I normally say that because I believe that Obama was a Manchurian candidate. This guy didn't even serve out his first term as a senator. I mean, He came out of nowhere, became a senator, did not even serve out a full term, not even half his term, and then he becomes the president twice. And then he implemented some of the most draconian laws ever instituted. So I believe that, all of them answer to that hand behind the scene. What say you about that? Because it seems like regardless of whether it's a black president, a white president, or a Republican or a Democrat, they may slightly differ, but most of the policies remain the same.
Yeah. Again, I'll give you a personal story here just to explain why I'm going to say what I say. When I resigned from being the weapons inspector with the United Nations, I had a very high profile. I testified for the Senate and I was on TV, and so people were like, my name was known. So I get a phone call from a guy named Jack Kemp, and you might recognize that name. Former quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, went on to be a senator, and then the Secretary for Housing and Urban Development under Ronald Reagan. So he was a conservative Republican who had some innovative ideas about how to fix the urban problem in America, which we know what that's slang for. So a white guy fixing a black problem. But anyways, I get a call from Jack Kemp, and he says, "I want you to come to a meeting." And I said, "Well, what kind of meeting do you want me to come to?" I said, "I just want you to meet some people." I said, "Okay, I'll come and meet some people." And I showed up, and it was Westchester, New York, Westchester County, outside of New York City, very wealthy county. And I went to one of these mansions, and there was literally hundreds of white people there, and they were the money people. So you want to talk about who selects? I was amongst those who select, and I had been selected. They had selected me, and they were going to bring me in, and they were going to anoint me and make me a United States congressman. And I'm telling you right now, had I played their game, I'd probably be Senator Scott Ritter right now. Fortunately, I didn't want to play the game, but I mean, that was it. They had reached down and they had selected me. I didn't want to run for office. I didn't express. They had selected me, and then I was supposed to come in and play the game. And had I just kept my mouth shut and let them write the checks, it was a straight shot. They had picked the district that I was going to run into. They'd already coordinated with all the local Republican people. I was going to come in, uncontested primary, run again in a strong Republican stronghold against, there would be nobody the Democrats could put up to counter me, and I would become a Republican congressman. I'd be sent there. And then because of my name, I'd be put on all the right committees, and I would be the guy that would be on TV talking, explaining this stuff to America. But it's not me explaining anything. It's me reading the script of the powers that be who have selected me to come in and do their bidding. Now, fortunately, I made them ask me two questions because they kept saying, I said, "You guys don't know who I am." "Scott, we know who you are. You're a man of honor, a man of integrity. You're the right kind of guy. You're the kind of guy America needs. You're the kind of guy America wants. But you don't know me." And I said, "So just ask me two questions. Ask me about gun control." "Scott, how do you feel about gun control?" I said, "Man, I own weapons." They're like, "Yeah, you're a kind of guy." I said, "I used to be a hunter." "Yeah, you're a guy." But I said, you got to register these weapons. You can't just have weapons irresponsible. It's got to be responsible ownership. There needs to be registration. You can't just hand weapons out willy-nilly. And why in God's name do we need assault weapons? They're like, oh my God. I said, when they asked me the second question, he said, "What's your second question?" I said, "Ask me about abortion." They went, "Okay, how do you feel about abortion?" And I said, "Man, I'm the father of twin daughters. Love them to death. Can't imagine the world without them. I couldn't imagine aborting them. That's just wrong for me. I mean, no matter what my situation was, my wife got pregnant. We were going to bring these daughters into the world." And they're like, "Okay, you just redeemed yourself." And then I said, "But it's not my choice. Not my choice. You see, I'm a guy. The woman carrying the baby gets a vote, and her vote has to count." And they were just, that was it. That was the end of the event. And Jack Kemp's just sitting there going, "Dude, you just threw it away." And I said, "But it would have been dishonest. I mean, it would have been dishonest. I would not have been the guy you want, because I can't do what you want me to do. I can't turn off the brain and just play the game," which is what every single member of Congress does. That's what I'm trying to tell you. They're all owned by the money. No person who doesn't have any money, let's say today I wanted to run for Congress. I go out there and I get the petition signed and I'm out there running. I will never be elected Congress because I don't have money. Money is the deciding factor. And who has the money? Special interests, the powers, the establishment, deep state, whatever you want to call it. They have the money. They pick the people. The only person that could get away with this was somebody who had money. Historically speaking, Ross Perot found a viable third-party candidate because he had independent money. Donald Trump was able to do it because he had a lot of money. Bernie Sanders was viable because he turned his back on the establishment money and went with grassroots money, but the establishment screwed him in the end anyways. So, that's the thing. Everybody answers to a higher power. You're 100% correct. And that higher power is the deep state, this monolithic blob of unelected power. linked to the military industrial complex, linked to big oil, linked to pharmaceuticals, linked to everything. And they've come in with their special interest groups and they own Washington, D.C., lock, stock, and barrel. And the only way we're going to fix this is to take money out of politics, but that requires Congress to take action. And if you're Congressman Scott Ritter, I can't do that because the people that put me here are the people you're now asking me to remove from politics, and that's not going to happen because the next election, they'll just deselect me. I tell you, ask any congressperson who has been deselected what happens. Because look at Liz Cheney. You know, she was a sure bet in Wyoming. Sure bet she could run forever. Could have retired in the grave. But then the Republican Party deselected her. The establishment deselected her, and Liz Cheney is no longer a congressperson. Same thing with Adam Kinzinger. Anybody who goes against the system gets deselected, and no matter how big they think they are, they ain't that big. They're going to lose every single time. If the establishment is behind you, tend to win. If they're against you, you never win. And that's the thing. You're right. They're selected. Now, people say, well, wait a minute. We go to the elections and we vote. But who got on the ballot? Who got on the ballot? What are you voting for? You didn't pick them. They were selected for you. And generally speaking, the Republican and the Democrat that are on the name aren't that different. They're going to govern the same way because the establishment needs them to govern the same way. So you're picking them. Look, when Barack Obama was hand-plucked out of nowhere to give the speech at the Democratic Convention, the fix was in. They listened to him speak. That was his audition. He was clean and articulate and black. That was important. I mean, Joe Biden, you know, you may hate his politics, and I do, but sometimes he's just very honest. You know, and that's a very honest thing for Joe Biden to say about Barack Obama. He's clean, he's articulate, and he's black.
Yeah. Now, 2 questions left, and then the final question I want was Scott. So we'll go with let's highlight this question here. Scott, Cigar Barrow says, please ask Scott, Mr. Scott, about Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow. So why is it happening right now? And what message are they trying to convey to the West?
Well, let's set this up a little bit. China and Russia have a strategic relationship. It's not an alliance. It's stronger than an alliance, according to them. And it's proven that's indeed the case, because an alliance, when you put it down in writing, that becomes a trap. That becomes a prison. The words on the paper become a prison because that's what the alliance says. For instance, NATO, the NATO charter is a prison. It's not this all wonderful, liberating experience. It's a prison. China and Russia don't have a prison. They have a relationship that's stronger than any alliance. But China, their approach to foreign policy is predicated on what's called Westphalian principles, dating back to the Treaty of Westphalia, which brought an end to the 100 Years' War. And the idea was you have to respect the sovereignty of nations. And for China, this is very important because of Taiwan. They don't want other nations coming in and interfering with Taiwan. And so when Russia invaded Ukraine, that's a violation of Westphalian principles. So China's in a quandary. The nation that they have this great relationship with just did something that's very inconvenient for China, put China in a tough position. Now, China, being the good friend that they are, has played neutral on Russia's military intervention, but they aren't sanctioning Russia. In fact, they're actively advocating for the rest of the world to continue to do business with Russia. But for China, the war is a problem. The war is problematic for a number of reasons. One, we have to get back to Westphalian principles. Two, if Russia doesn't prevail, this empowers the collective West, and the collective West has China as the next target over Taiwan. So that's what's going on here. So now, Xi Jinping was just elected for an unprecedented 3rd term as president. So he's powerful, and he cleaned house. Trust me. If you take a look at what he did, became president. It's sort of sad to see, but there was this one scene where, he'd just been nominated, so everybody sits down, and there's this one dude sitting there, old dude who's been there forever, and he's sort of pro-American. He's one of the guys out there advocating for good relations with America. And suddenly the boys come up and surround him and say, get up, you're no longer here. And he's looking around, and Xi Jinping's just sort of ignoring him. Everybody's ignoring him, and he sort of got up and he took him away. They didn't kill him. This isn't the 60s, but he disappeared. He's no longer on the team. The team was reshaped to people who think like Xi Jinping. But they can't just come right out and say, we support Russia in this conflict, because there's problems. But this conflict has gone away from just being Russia against Ukraine to Russia against the collective West, and the collective West is the enemy, and China's been saying that. And so how do you square this circle? China is going to try and pull a rabbit out of the hat, the peace rabbit. And they've already floated a 12-point peace plan, or peace principles. You can't really call it a plan. And they learned a lot from it. They put it out there, and United States and Europe rejected it. The Ukrainians went, interesting. And the Russians went, problematic. And so, but that's okay. That's why you do it. That's why you float a trial balloon, and you sit back and you go, oh, okay, we got problems. And then the foreign minister of China comes to Moscow, sits down with Lavrov, meets Putin, and problems start to be talked about. And then they travel around, they talk to people, and problems are talked about. And the reason why I bring this up is no leader of the stature of Xi Jinping likes to go overseas on high-profile visits and be ambushed, or ambush the person that's receiving them. When Vladimir Putin meets with Xi Jinping, the agenda that they're going to be talking on has already been agreed to, including peace plan. Whatever Xi Jinping has that he's going to bring, Vladimir Putin has already read, consulted with his people, modified it, and put it on the table. And this is why it's important, because this isn't a trip that's meant to accomplish nothing. If it was going to accomplish nothing, then why would you go on this trip? This trip is designed to accomplish something. And that something is to be seen as giving peace a chance before Russia finishes this war. Russia's on the cusp of destroying Ukraine right now. I know, guys, we all read the Western media, and it says that Russia's losing, Putin has cancer, and all this stuff. But that's all a lie. Russia's winning the war. Ukraine's running out of ammunition. They're running out of men. Russia has a lot of ammunition, has a lot of men, and it's just the writing's on the wall. So there's a feeling right now that Zelensky is in a very difficult spot, because up until now, Zelensky has said, we're not going to negotiate with Russians. Putin has to leave. You have to give us Crimea back, all this kind of stuff. But now the West is sort of telling Zelensky, you're going to die. It's just that simple. You're going to lose the war, then you're going to die. And there's nothing we can do about that. And Zelensky's like, well, I don't want to die. And you're telling me I can't win the war. But what other options do I have? I've been shutting down every peace plan in the world, but not the Chinese peace plan. And so the Chinese are going to come in and talk with Putin. And I think they're going to get Putin to agree to a framework, a peace framework, that if presented to Zelensky and Zelensky accepts it without change, this isn't going to be a negotiation. This is going to be a dictation. This is what you have to accept. And if Zelensky says no, then the Chinese said, we gave it the good college try. Vlad, underlay, arriba, finish the job. And the Russians will go in and finish the job. And Zelensky will die, and the West will be embarrassed. But now if they come in and they tell, and what I don't know what it is, but I listened to Vladimir Putin, so I think I know what could be in it. What's going to be in it, I believe, is absolute sovereignty over the 4 territories that were annexed last September, and continued sovereignty over Crimea. So Ukraine will have to acknowledge that they lose these territories forever. That is Russia from now on. It's never getting it back. That's a tough pill to swallow. But Putin has said, we believe in demilitarization. That used to be the total annihilation of the Ukrainian army. But in his February 21st speech, Putin said, we will retake all of Russian territory, and then we will push the Ukrainians back to the maximum range of the most modern system provided to them by the West, which is the HIMARS system with the small bomb unit. That's 150 kilometers. So he's saying we're going to push the Ukrainian military back. Now, listen to what he's saying there. 150 kilometers from Russian border. So that means that the territory that Russia's going to push him back, Russia's not claiming as Russia yet. yet. But look at what is 150 kilometers away from the Russian border. The city of Odessa, a Russian city. The city of Dnipropetrovsk, a Russian city. The city of Kharkov, a Russian city. So once Russia actually does this, these Russian cities will become real Russian cities. And then we start all over again. And that's the inevitability. Zelensky has to know right now that this war doesn't end if Russia is allowed to push forward, because they're going to lose all the Black Sea coast. They're going to lose all this territory that's east of the Dnieper River. And Ukraine will be nothing. There will be nothing left. And he's going to die. Zelensky will die. So what the Russians are saying is, if you agree to this peace plan, you will withdraw your military 150 kilometers away from the border. There will be a demilitarized zone here. It'll still be Ukraine. It's yours. Odessa is yours. Dnipropetrovsk is yours. Kharkov is yours. But your military can't be anywhere near this. And what's interesting is the implication is that the Ukrainian military gets to keep all the toys that they've been given. So it's not demilitarization. So that's sort of a face-saving thing. And that's a tough pill, because remember, you have this army that's engaged in this big fight, and you don't want a stab in the back moment like what happened to the German army in World War I, where they suddenly the war ended, they went home and they're like, well, we were still fighting, you guys stabbed us in the back. You don't want a Ukrainian army that says the same thing, because that becomes a political problem. So you allow Ukraine to save face, preserve their army, but there's a 150-kilometer demilitarized zone that'll be in place, and they'll never join NATO again. Sounded harsh maybe 3 months ago, but today, when you compare that to you're going to lose everything and you're going to die, that's suddenly what goes, wait a minute, you mean we get to keep these cities? It's Ukraine, we get the Black Sea coast, and we get to keep our army? Yeah. Sign me up. And, that may be the thing. So that, I don't know. I haven't read the peace plan, but I do listen to Vladimir Putin, and I know he doesn't speak, half-cocked. And he gave that speech after he was briefed on the Chinese peace plan. So that speech, I believe, conforms his understanding of conditions that would have to be in play if the peace plan went forward. So I think there's reason to believe that that could be part of this, because, Z isn't going to sit down with Zelensky to do a video conference and hand him a plan that's designed to fail. He has to give him a plan that has I was going to say, oh gosh, I got to watch what I say. See, I'm just one of these idiot Marines that, they gave me a whole bunch of sayings in my head. And back when I learned the sayings, they weren't a problem. But now when you say it, you're like, that sounds pretty bad. So I can't say it. But they're going to give him I'll say, you can't give him a plan that has a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding. You have to give him a plan that's viable. And if they give this to Zelensky and he turns it down, the Chinese at least can say, in good faith, we tried to do this. And we wash our hands of what's about to happen. It's on Zelensky, it's on the West. Russia now has a free hand. But if they get the peace, it'll be a tough pill for Russia to swallow. It really will be a tough pill for Russia to swallow, because they've lost a lot of men. They feel betrayed by the West. Why would they enter into an agreement that keeps Zelensky and the Nazis in power? But it does bring an end to this war, and it creates the opportunity now for China, because here's one of the biggest problems out there. $1 trillion of infrastructure damage has been done to Ukraine. Ain't no one got $1 trillion out there to pay for this, except the Chinese. And so China is going to sit there and tell Zelensky all this damage stuff. The West is bankrupt. They ain't giving you any more money, pal. Russia, they don't like you. They're going to be building their own stuff up. China, on the other hand, we can come in, we can do business. And we'd like to bring in our Belts and Roads Initiative, come in and build up your trains and up your highways. All those high-speed trains that work in China can work in Ukraine too. We can transform your society and make it a good place and make you a power that could join the European Union, because Russia's not going to say no to the European Union. That's their business. Russia cares about Russia. Russia's done with Europe, but it could also create the conditions where Europe and Russia are able to peacefully coexist together. Now we get that European security framework that Russia always wanted. So there's a lot of good things that could come from this, from a peace treaty. It's an uphill struggle, but that's why Xi Jinping's visiting Moscow.
Well, when Ukraine lose all of this strategic utility to the West, if Russia, they take the Donbass, they took They now control the Sea of Azov, and then they control the whole coastal area of what is formerly Ukraine, and they have all of the fertile land and everything for farming. When Ukraine lose all of its geostrategic utility for the West after that?
Ukraine only exists to create conflict with Russia. And so if Zelensky buys into whatever peace plan is put in front of him, what he's basically saying is, I choose peace, not war. And the day of Western manipulation of Ukraine is over. I'm opting for the survival of Ukraine. And here's the deal. There's a growing awakening in the West that we've lost this conflict. I mean, we're just admitting that to ourselves. We can't supply them with anything else. Ukraine needs, I'm making it up, 1,000 units of artillery shells a month, and we can only provide them with 400 artillery shells a month. And if they're using 1,000, they're going to run out of the reserves. We can't replenish them. Then they don't have any artillery, and it's an artillery-driven war. And the Russians have a lot of artillery and a lot of ammunition, and Russia's going to win the war. There's nothing we can do to stop this. So from the West, the question is, do you accept a peace that isn't a total defeat? In fact, you could claim, if you're the West, that suddenly you have to change your tune, though. The Russians stop being incompetent. You say, the overwhelming power of Russia was brought to a halt by the Ukrainian resistance that was enabled by our assistance. And yes, this is not the ideal situation, but it could have been much worse because evil Putin wanted to eat all of Ukraine, and we able to stop him. And they can tell them those stuff at night, read the little tales before they go to bed at night so they don't have nightmares. But that is a face-saving mechanism, which is a heck of a lot better than going, well, Russia destroyed Ukraine, occupied everything, and we now are left holding an empty bag. So, yes, no matter what happens, the geopolitical architecture of Europe is going to be transformed. But you can make the outcome either bad for the West or awful for the West. And I think they're going to say that bad is good.
Well, the last question of the day before I get to close with a question. This is from Chi Nkwame. Let me highlight it. It says, please ask Mr. Ritter, how will the Russian upper hand in Ukraine affect Africa positively or negatively?
That's a good question. It's been interesting. There's been competing diplomatic trips by the United States and its allies and Russia going to Africa. And Lavrov's coming off pretty good. He's the foreign minister. Everywhere he goes in Africa, they sort of greet him with open arms. They're pals, they're friends. And when asked why Russia, they say, well, first of all, there weren't any Russian colonies in Africa. So when the Russians come over here, they're not treating us like former colonialists. They're treating us as people, because if you remember during the Soviet Union, the anti-colonial movements were backed by the Russians. They were the ones bringing in the revolutionary movements. So all these revolutionary governments that have come into power, remember who their friend was back in that time, and the friend was spelled Russia. And when the Russians come in, they just want to do business and treat with you as equals. That's all they want. When the United States comes in, they threaten, they intimidate, they bully. And there was a curious meeting. Tony Blinken went down to South Africa and met with the head of external affairs, or their foreign minister, a female whose name I forget right now, and I apologize for that. But she sort of lectured him, saying, you guys come in here and you dictate to us, and we're beyond that. Blinken's like, oh, no, that was the past. We will never do that again now. This is the new America. At the same time, his ambassador to the United Nations, a black lady, by the way, shows up in Uganda and tells the Ugandan government, if you dare do business with Russia, we will sanction you. She said it the day after Blinken promised that that's not what America does anymore. That's what America does. We view Africa as a colony, just like we view the world as a colony. And so if the collective West is able to defeat Russia and Ukraine, that would probably cause Russia to retract its global position, which means, well, I can't say they'll be totally out of Africa, there would be a reduced posture in Africa. If Russia wins, Russia will have an increased posture in Africa. But Russian posture, isn't the way the Americans do it. I mean, yes, now Russia is doing some things with Wagner, which is a paramilitary group that's doing. But look at what Wagner's done. Mali, a former French colony, has a big terrorist problem: Al Qaeda, ISIS. And the French have been in there working with the Americans to try and suppress it. But France, like America, comes in with strings. So they say, here's our military, but meanwhile, we're going to manipulate your government, try and overthrow people, put our people in the government. We want to control your country economically, da, da, da. And they're going, okay, but you're getting your butts kicked on the battlefield. Them terrorists, you're winning. And the Russians come in and say, all we want to do is kill terrorists. And the Malians are like, but do you want to control our government? No, we just want to kill terrorists. We want to help you kill terrorists. And then maybe get some business. And they go, okay. So Wagner comes in, they start killing terrorists. They start winning. And the Mali government's going, they've never once tried to interfere with how we govern. And the West are going, because you're human rights violators, you're criminals, you're war criminals, you're murderous things. The answer is no, they're not. They're a sovereign nation running their country the way they want to run their country, which deviates from post-French colonial rule. And so that's how Russia does it. They've done it in Mali. They've done it in the Central African Republic. The Central African Republic, how many times have you seen an African country put up a statue of an American soldier? Say, you're the best, or a French soldier. Thank you for your colonial French presence. In the Central African Republic, they have raised a statue to Wagner, to the Wagner soldiers, because Wagner comes in and makes them secure, helps them defeat the terrorists that are operating there. Wagner's not perfect. I'm not pretending they are perfect. But we've now called Wagner a criminal organization, and we're going to try and sanction them to drive them out of Africa, but it's not going to work. Why? Because Africa's waking up. Africa's waking up. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, he just recently went in and he had a fascinating moment with, I think it was the president of Congo, and where he was trying to lecture him, as white French colonialists do. Yes, Mr. Black President, but listen to me. I know, because we're the French. We ruled you all. Da, 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 da. And the guy goes, stop. Lecture. And don't lecture to me about the words of a French journalist. The guy goes, dude, it wasn't a French journalist. It was your foreign minister. Your foreign minister is lecturing us, and he just put him in his place. It was a wonderful moment, an empowering moment for a Black African leader to put a white post-colonial European leader in his place. And that's what's happening with Africa right now. It's growing up as a continent. It's the empowerment that's there. And Africa has a lot of potential. And the problem is, here's the thing for Africa. If the Russians lose in Ukraine, it will have a negative impact on Africa, because the United States and others who don't like you, I hope you know that by now, we don't like you. We just want to use you. We want to use your potential to empower ourselves. We want to continue to gain access to the resources of Africa at below market rates, so we can bring it to the United States and convert it into consumer products that are affordable to the American consumer, so we can keep this machine going. The Russians, on the other hand, are coming in saying, what you selling? What's the market rate? Can we do that? Yeah, we'll buy X. We'll work with you. How can we get that price lower? What can we do to help get that price lower? And they're treating them as human beings, equals. There's no colonial master here. There's no secret French colonial policy to come in and seize the economy by imposing an African franc on people. Remember the new Italian prime minister, Giorgia Meloni, one of the first things she did is hold a briefing where she exposed how France is using post-colonial politics to impose currency domination of Africa. Russia's not doing any of that. And so if Russia wins in Ukraine, Africa will be better off. If Russia loses in Ukraine, Africa will be worse off.
Final question. I'm going to give my question to Real Truth Talk, because I think he deserves it. So I'll give it to him. And Scott, you can answer this. Let me highlight it on the screen real quick. He says, can you ask Scott if he thinks the Russians recovered the drone? And I'll ask, what are the ramifications of that if they have?
Yeah, because that was part of the question that you asked, and we got deviated with the American base, but we never went on to the drone. So we'll talk about the drone for a second. The MQ-9 Reaper drone is a very capable drone. It's sort of the follow-on of the Predator drone, which was the first armed drone that the United States has. It's been ubiquitous in how we've operated in the global war on terror in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and elsewhere, Yemen. This drone is out there. Barack Obama mastered the tactic of drone-based assassinations. We have killed thousands of people using these drones. And the Reaper drone is bigger, can carry more weapons, can carry more sensors. And one of the things they're used for is intelligence collection. They have these advanced sensor pods that go in and collect cell phone, radio, radar. All the electronic signals are sucked into this thing. And so what we were doing with the Reaper is flying it up the coast of the Crimean Peninsula, because we don't recognize Russia's claims on Crimea. We say that Crimea is Ukrainian territory. And so under international law, you can, how coastlines do this, and if you project a 12 nautical mile, territorial waters off of that, you get an uneven line. So in the interest of navigation, you can draw a straight line that passes through the sovereign territory as long as it's innocent passage. Just saying, hey guys, we're doing innocent passage here. We're not a threat to anybody. Under international law, we must be permitted to go. So we're trying to assert innocent passage for an MQ-9 Reaper drone equipped with an advanced signals intelligence collection pod. At a time when we are actively collecting intelligence and giving it to the Ukrainians who use it to target Russian troops and equipment. So we're an active participant in the conflict where there's nothing innocent about what we're doing. So we're flying this drone up there, and in order to disguise it, because we don't want to be tracked, we turn off the transponder. So now there's no evidence of it. So the Russians go out to investigate, and there it is, the drone. And they see the pod and they know that this is a threat. Plus, Russia had already put out what they call an exclusionary zone, which they're allowed to do on international law. They say, we have sensitive military operations taking place here. This is an exclusion zone. You must go about. But we're saying, you don't own Ukraine. You don't have any legal authority to impose an exclusion zone. So we reject your exclusion zone. We're flying through it. And the Russians went, no, you're not. And so 19 times they flew Su-27 aircraft by the drone, trying to shoo it away. Shoo away, drone. Shoo away. Shoo away. And the drone wouldn't shoo away. So then they came in, they started dumping fuel on it. This is an old Cold War tactic the Russians used to do, because we used to do this kind of stuff. Remember when we talked about the INF Treaty and how bad relations were before the INF Treaty? Well, that's because before the INF Treaty, we were flying the same kind of operations up and down the Soviet coast. And sometimes they shoot down our airplanes. Sometimes they scare our airplanes away. If we did it with ships, sometimes they rammed our ships. They'd ram our submarines. We had our submarines going into their ports to put spy devices on. I mean, I'm talking about going inside their port. It's like a Soviet sub going into San Francisco Harbor. Maybe they did. I don't know. But we're doing that. And if we got caught, they would have killed us. They're dropping depth charges on us and all that kind of stuff. And there's a whole secret war that was fought during the Cold War with hundreds of Americans who were killed, but we had to call them, because of the classified nature of their missions, missing in action or unaccounted for. It's one of the great tragedies of the war that many of those people haven't been admitted as casualties because of this. So we've done it before, we're doing it now, and the Russians using similar tactics. So they come in and they dump fuel in an effort to get the plane to lose aerodynamic and crash in the sea, and they succeeded. Some people say that they rammed it. I don't know. I would just have to think that if an Su-27, given the mass and the velocity, made kinetic contact with a Reaper drone, that the Reaper drone would have done a tail dip, lost, and fallen. That thing kept flying here. So I think they dumped fuel, and the weight of the fuel. If you jump out of an airplane into the water high enough, the water turns into concrete. Even though it's water, when you hit it, it's like hitting concrete. So when you dump the fuel at a certain velocity, it's maintained certain molecular integrity. When it impacts a propeller in motion, it can do damage. So when you looked at the damage to the propeller, that could have possibly been done by the fuel impacting a propeller moving at high velocity, and damage is done. Bottom line is the drone went down. And I think the Russians had every right to take the drone down because we were doing the wrong thing. Now, do I think the Russians recovered the drone? I think the Russians are trying to recover the drone. That intelligence pod on the drone, it would be an intelligence bonanza if they could recover it. There might be some technologies on that drone too that, in terms of surface materials designed to, reflect radars, communications. Are there encrypted communications? Are they going to have a chance to get a hold of the crypto devices, things of that nature? So the Russians want to get a hold of this drone and take control of it. And the beauty of it is that if they get a hold of it, they don't have to tell us what they actually got, which means we have to sit there and think. They get everything? Do they know everything? Do we have to change what we're doing? Change our crypto? We lost that pod. We have to go new pod. And the Russians aren't going to sit there and go, well, this is what we got. Here's a shopping list. And we go, they didn't get everything. They're not going to say anything. We're going to have to sit there and guess what they got, and we're going to have to make alterations to it. The other thing is, we have some irresponsible rhetoric coming out of American politicians like Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, and Tom Cotton, who are making talk about sending up fighter planes to escort these drones into Russian aircraft enter international space to shoot them down. Got a newsflash for these guys. The Russians have air defense systems that can reach out and touch us all along the Crimean coast. We don't. Before they had a chance to shoot down a Russian airplane, they'd be shot out of the sky by Russian air defense. And then we'd have Russian search and rescue teams trying to pull their dead bodies out of the ocean. But that can lead to World War III. Any armed conflict, direct armed conflict between the United States and Russia has the potential to escalate to a nuclear conflict. And then we're right back to where we started at the beginning of this conversation about the end of all human life on the earth. So we don't want that. These are irresponsible politicians making irresponsible statements. And we'll see what happens. I know that we've sent up drones now. I haven't seen their flight profile. I have a funny feeling that the drones have been kept far enough away from the Russian coast not to provoke a similar incident, because the Russians have made it clear that they've drawn a red line and they're serious about enforcing their red lines.
Okay, well, thank you for your time. Scott, we're not going to hold you. We know that you're the busiest man on YouTube. So thank you for joining us. I'll send you the link to the show in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, and I'll get it out there. Yep.
All right, be blessed.
And you too. Where's your partner?
He works in some days. He works on the port in LA. So he's like a manager out there. So he has to be at that port someday to make sure some of the shipments.
You're telling me he's a working class American? I thought he was some sort of rap star, gangster. Oh my God. So he's just like us. He's a working class American. Okay. He had me fooled. He had me believing that if I said the wrong thing, he was going to pick up the phone and I was going to have a knock at the door and I was going to be taken for a long ride, because he has that look about him.
Yeah. He told me that he would love to be here, but he had to make sure some shipments came through and everything.
Well, he keeps America working. That, God bless him, and that's what makes America great. People like him doing the job, out there every day doing the job. So tell him I miss him, and hopefully we'll do this again, and I'll have a chance to talk to him.
All right, man. Be blessed and be safe.
Okay, you too. You too.
Everyone, I want to tell everyone, I want to thank you all for joining us on this program. Everything. I mean, it has been a pleasure. Also, Tuesday morning, we will have former CIA analyst Larry Johnson on the show, and we're going to have a lot of guests to appear on the show in the upcoming days and weeks. On that note, as we always say, we go out the same way we came in, with love in our heart for you. We love you. If you love truth, we love you. But remember that God would always love you best. Hey, Mom, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everyone. Thank you all.